Hey guys, tonight we journey back not just a few centuries, but over to millennia into the blistering deserts of ancient Persia, where the sun doesn't set so much as sizzle out. You're trudging across pale gold sand, your feet crunching over rock, the air shimmering like a heat mirage around you. It's the kind of dry that feels like you being slowly wrapped in toasted parchment. Nothing grows here, nothing cools here. And yet, in the middle of all this oven-grade climate, someone is enjoying ice cream. Real, cold, creamy, rose-scented ice cream. You're already sweating just thinking about it. This isn't a fantasy, this is history. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive the first half hour in this climate without SPF 9000. A gallon of electrolyte water, and at least 2 portable fans strapped to your chest. But these ancient Persians, they made ice in the desert before electricity, before modern plumbing, before anything made sense, and they made it delicious. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time you're listening in the comments. I want to know where my sleepy little history club is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking now across a patch of land that seems barren, almost boring, until you look closer. Scattered bits of clay pottery peek out from the soil. There's a low ridge in the distance, and something catches your eye. A faint sparkle in the sand. Could it be? You crouch closer. No, it's not glass. It's ice. A thin sliver, buried beneath a shaded overhang, miraculously preserved. You blink, and suddenly, the desert doesn't feel so empty. Ancient Persia, or more specifically, the Achaemenid Empire around 500 BCE, wasn't just dust and drama, it was an engineering marvel wrapped in a sunburn. This vast empire, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, wasn't shy about luxury. And in their world, luxury meant cold. Cold water, cold storage, cold deserts. In a climate where water evaporated faster than you could say, "Where's my canteen?" cold was king. You make your way into a small oasis village. There's no Google Maps here, no signs, just a dusty path and curious eyes peeking from behind linen curtains. A boy runs by carrying a strange honey-colored bowl. Inside it, slush. Glorious, slightly melting slush. He's giggling, probably because it's forbidden, or just extremely rare. You follow him? This isn't the kind of ice you're used to. No 7-Eleven crushed cubes or Sonic-style nugget ice. This is snow or ice gathered during the depths of winter from nearby mountains and carefully transported, block by glistening block, into the valleys below. It's kept in deep, conical structures, giant ice pits. They'll show you later. But for now, you follow the slushy trail. You duck into a shaded alleyway. Everything smells like sun-warmed clay, cardamom, and charcoal. A merchant rests beneath a woven canopy, fanning himself with a palm leaf and sipping something that looks suspiciously too chilled for this setting. He notices you, with a raised brow and a half smile. He motions you forward and hands you a tiny clay dish. You take a cautious bite. The cold hits your tongue like a whispered miracle. It's creamy, floral, with a faint crunch from slivers of frozen milk. A breeze passes through the alley, and for just a moment, the desert seems forgiving, but you can't help but wonder, how? How in this blazing, utterly unforgiving land did someone figure out how to make and keep ice? That's when an old woman calls you over. She sits beside a basket of dried herbs, tying little sachets together with practiced fingers. She tells you well, mumbles more than tells Rulia about a place not far from here. A place where the wind speaks, where stone meets sky, and where winter sleeps even in the heart of July. You're not entirely sure whether she's messing with you or just poetic, but the direction she points is unmistakable. So, you head toward it. You travel through a field of salt pans. your feet crunching over crystals that sparkle like shattered glass. The sun is merciless now. You squint through your lashes, and there, rising in the distance, is something strange. It looks like a beehive, but enormous. Maybe even 60 feet tall. Smooth, mud-colored, domed. No windows. Just a few vents, almost invisible at first. And nearby, palm trees whisper as they bend in the warm wind. Welcome to the edge of ancient refrigeration. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions of these structures called yakshuls were purely Persian inventions or evolved through cross-cultural influences via trade with Central Asia. But what's certain is that Persia refined them into an art form. You get closer. The surface of the dome is cool to the touch thanks to a special mortar made from a blend of clay, sand, ash, egg whites, goat hair, and lime. Seriously, egg whites was like a protein smoothie for buildings. This mixture made it incredibly resistant to both heat and water, perfect for keeping things chilly. A local boy appears out of nowhere, beckoning you to follow. You duck through a narrow tunnel carved into the base of the dome. The air shifts, immediately cool, still, almost reverent. It smells faintly of limestone and oddly, mint. The passage slopes downward. Step by careful step, you descend into the belly of the yakshull. The walls sweat ever so slightly, a testament to the delicate balance inside. And at the bottom, like a hidden treasure, rests a wide basin. It's dry now, but you can almost hear the echoes of laughter from winter months, when teams of men lowered ice slabs into the chamber, stacking them like frosty bricks of gold. And then comes the genius part. The design. The dome channels rising hot air away, while underground Canute's man-made channels bring in cold air from deep aquifers. The entire thing functions like a passive refrigerator powered only by architecture and air pressure. It's beautiful, it's quiet, and it worked. You imagine it now. Families storing perishable food, medicines, and treats, all during the boiling summer months. Ice cream wasn't just a snack. It was a ceremony, sign of wealth, a whisper of winter on your tongue. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That first icy bite, that came much later. For now, you've just stepped into the beginning of a cold revolution, in the last place you'd expect. Some historians even suggest that the earliest ice houses might have been used for religious rituals, offerings of preserved snow to the gods, or cooling chambers for sacred texts. Others think it was just pure human stubbornness. You know, the classic "I will eat frozen dessert, even if the sun itself tries to stop me" mentality. And can we blame them? As you climb back out of the yakshull, the desert air feels warmer than before. But you're holding on to a tiny chill in your bones. The knowledge that somehow the impossible was possible here. You hear a woman laughing softly nearby. She's scooping something out of a stone bowl, something yellow and soft, topped with pistachios. It's too early for you to know the name yet, but it's your first glimpse of Bastani's Sanati Persian ice cream. And trust me, we'll be getting to that soon. For now, you walk under the lengthening shadows toward the place where the wind begins to sing. You keep walking toward the wind. It's not a loud wind, more like a thoughtful one. It slips along the earth, nudging grains of sand, teasing the hem of your robe, rustling the tops of dry grasses that somehow still believe in rain. You turn your head. There's a low humming now, like the desert itself is breathing. And that's when you see it. A tall tower rises from the roof of a simple building. Not grand, not flashy, just purposeful. Slotted windows face every direction, open to the air like giant nostrils. The tower looks hollow, empty, but as you get closer, you feel a cool air pouring from its base, like a sigh from a very old, very clever creature. You've just met your first badgeron, ancient windcatcher. You step inside the building. The floor is tiled in worn stone, still surprisingly cool despite the outside heat. The air drifts down from above, brushing past you in steady waves. No fans, no electricity. Just architecture doing its best impression of a miracle. Wind catchers are one of those inventions that feel too good to be true. Imagine building a giant straw, sticking it into the sky, and somehow convincing nature to air condition your living room. That's basically what the Persians did. They didn't fight the wind, they invited it in for tea. You glance up the shaft of the tower. It stretches far above, where a cross breeze waits to be pulled downward. Inside, the air splits, drops, and then flows into the room. If it encounters water or a shallow basin, evaporation cools it even further. And because hot air rises, the warm stuff gets sucked out through other vents. It's passive cooling, and it worked. It still works. In fact, some modern eco-buildings today still borrow from this ancient design. Mainstream historians credit the use of wind catchers to ancient Iran, especially in the central desert cities like Yazd, where they became a signature part of architecture. But badgers also show up in Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula. There is still a bit of scholarly chest thumping over who did it first, Persia or Egypt. But the Persian refinement of the system is hard to argue against, especially when you're standing in one. A sleepy cat blinks at you from under a table, clearly unfazed by the science of airflow. You take a seat beside it and press your hand to the floor. Cool, again. It's hard not to be impressed. It's also hard not to feel jealous. Your apartment struggles to stay under 80 degrees Fahrenheit, even with 2 fans and a desperate prayer to the utility gods. But back in this ancient house, things are simple. Stone walls, clay pots, a jug of pomegranate juice sweating on a nearby stand, another quiet beneficiary of the badger. The entire structure is designed to funnel, trap, and redirect air like a living organism. You wander outside again and tilt your face toward the wind. The badger stands watch like a patient sentinel. In Yazd, some of these towers still reach up over 30 meters tall. They're symmetrical, often elegant. And sometimes, people painted the inside of the shafts with lime to further cool the air, before it reached the rooms below. One source even mentions the use of crushed seashells in the plaster to help reflect heat. But the real trick, the truly weird and delightful part, tells how they sometimes worked with water. You walk around the side of the building and find a narrow chanula, shallow trench leading into the base of the tower. The water inside is barely moving, but it glistens in the afternoon sun. This is part of a qanat system, an underground aqueduct that brings water from distant mountain springs all the way to this parched settlement. Now, imagine this. Wind flows down the tower, across the water, and into the rooms beyond. Instant swamp cooler, no power needed. The more arid the climate, the better the cooling effect. It's basically desert alchemy. You bend over the qanat and let the water run over your fingers. It's cold, not fridge cold, but definitely not what you expected from a trench in the sand. And here's where things get even more interesting. Sometimes, the Persians used these qanats to help make their yakshals colder. By piping water beneath or near them, they could create a double cooling system: air from the badger, water from the qanat, and a dome built to trap the cold inside. Layer upon layer of subtle design. And if that sounds advanced for 500 BCE, it absolutely was. Even modern engineers today marvel at the efficiency of these ancient systems. They've tried to simulate similar designs for off-grid homes. A 2011 study showed that, under the right conditions, a well-placed badger could lower interior temperatures by more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Some old Persian homes even used a tower swan for pulling air in, one for pushing it out. Like having lungs made of brick and clay. You glance over your shoulder. Another tower looms in the distance, part of a larger estate. A breeze stirs your tunic. There's movement behind a curtain, and then someone places a tray of cold fruit in the shade. Grapes, dates, melon slices. You help yourself, obviously. This was the daily miracle of badgers. They didn't just make rooms tolerable. They let people store food longer, rest better, and even build underground libraries where scrolls could be kept safely away from heat and rot. Think about that. A desert civilization reading poetry by candlelight, cooled by wind they borrowed from the sky. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some Roman visitors apparently dismissed these cooling towers as quaint desert tricks. But let's be honest, how many aqueducts in Italy were also cold enough to store milk? Still, historians argue whether wind catchers started as climate hacks or as spiritual symbols. Some think their symmetrical shapes and skyward reach had ritual meaning. Others insist they were all about comfort and ice cream. Speaking of which, you hear music, soft and strange. A reed pipe and a rhythmic tapping, like fingers on an empty bowl. You follow the sound to a small courtyard. A man is fanning coals beneath a large copper bowl. Nearby, another man stirs something thick and yellow inside a churn. And next to him, a bucket of, is that snow? You step closer. Turns out, this part of town imports ice from the nearby mountains in the dead of winter. The blocks are stored in yakshials, like the one you visited earlier, and pulled out in small quantities for summer use. Today, that means ice cream, not the creamy American variety. This one is floral, chewy, and slightly stretchy. Think, a frozen cousin of taffy mixed with a cloud. The base is milk, but it's flavored with rosewater, saffron, and saluba, flour made from orchid tubers that gives it that unique texture. Oh, and don't forget the pistachios. It's called bastani sonati. But don't worry, you'll get your own bowl soon enough. Before that though, you're handed a cold glass filled with something stringy and translucent. It's faluda dessert made from thin vermicelli noodles frozen in a syrup of rosewater and lime juice. It's like if a slushy and a noodle soup fell in love and moved to Shiraz. Sounds weird. Tastes like the best brain freeze of your life. You take a sip. The air around you seems even cooler now. The breeze from the Badgir flows gently past the courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, a goat sneezes, which isn't relevant, but still kind of funny. You lie back against a cushion, full and freezing in the middle of a desert. And you can't help but smile. You've just stepped into one of the most quietly revolutionary chapters in ancient history. No wars, no pyramids. Just wind, water, clay, and the stubborn genius of a people who refuse to sweat if they didn't have to. So next time your AC breaks and you feel like civilization is over, remember the Badgers. They've been here longer. They've kept people cooler than you for centuries. The sun sets slowly behind the towers, and for the first time today, the desert feels like it's exhaling. You wake to soft light filtering through a lattice of reeds. The room is still, the air faintly cool. A bowl of water glints beside you, already forming the tiniest beads of condensation. Outside, the city stirs a donkey brays. Footsteps shuffle along the dusty lane. And the ever-present wind hums its quiet tune through the tower above. You're still in ancient Persia, where surviving the sun is a full-time job and outsmarting it is an art form. Today, you're going underground. You've heard the whispers, structures that store winter itself, great domes of earth and ash, secret staircases spiraling into the belly of the land. It all sounds a bit mythical, like something from a bedtime fable. But no, these are Yaxel's literal ice pits, and they're very real. As you leave the shaded courtyard and follow your guide through the city, the heat quickly reasserts itself. It slinks around corners. It rises from the stones. It taps at your neck like an impatient waiter. The fact that anyone could keep anything frozen in this heat? Unbelievable. But here comes your proof. Looming on the horizon like an upside-down ice cream cone made of earth. It's huge. 30 feet tall, maybe more. Smooth-sided, colored like dry wheat. A gentle dome rises above a thick circular base. No windows. No flashy carvings, just sheer, purposeful elegance. You've reached the actual. You circle around it slowly. The outer walls are made of sarouj, a special mix of sand, clay, lime, egg whites, goat hair, and ash. Somehow, This prehistoric smoothie creates a waterproof, heat-resistant shell that's still baffling modern scientists. It repels sunlight, it shrugs off moisture, and most importantly, it traps cold like a secret. A small door beckons. You duck inside and descend. The air cools immediately, not like the breeze from a fan or the blast of a modern Asino. This is deep cold, the kind that hugs your bones, the kind that makes your scalp tingle, the kind that, in the middle of a Persian summer, feels like an act of rebellion. The walls curve above you, leading to a broad chamber hollowed out below ground. This is where the ice was stored. Slabs harvested during winter and lowered carefully into the pit, stacked, wrapped, and left to wait out the long, punishing summer. But how well? For one, the shape of the yakchul matters. That dome isn't just decorative, it creates natural convection. Hot air rises and escapes through a small vent at the top, while cooler air settles below. The pit is dug deep well below ground level where the Earth's own temperature helps insulate the contents. Then there's the placement. Yakchuls were often built in specific orientations shielded from prevailing winds, but open to the cold night skies of winter, and many had shallow water pools nearby. During the frigid nights, water would freeze in these pools. The ice was then broken up at dawn and carried inside. You run your fingers along the inner wall. It's smooth and cold, even now. Somewhere near your foot, you spot a small drainage channel that would carry away meltwater so it didn't T-warm the ice stack. Every detail mattered. Every brick had a purpose. And it wasn't just about storing ice. Sometimes these pits were used to keep perishables, cool milk, fruits, rosewater syrups. Other times, they stored mixtures meant to become ice cream later, slowly firming up in clay containers nestled between frozen blocks. The whole thing was like a silent refrigerator the size of a barn. Quirkier still, some historians believe yakchuls might have hosted secret gatherings. Not just storage vaults, but cooling salons, places to sip cold drinks, escape the heat, and even share poetry. Imagine sneaking into a chilly dome with your friends to recite verses and nibble on candy dates. Your local 7-Eleven has nothing on this vibe. There are even rumors, half legend, half scholarship, of ice vault heists. Because yes, in a world where cold was luxury, ice could be stolen. A few sneaky servants in ancient court kitchens were supposedly caught shaving down blocks of royal ice for black market desserts. Which, let's be honest, is probably the most delicious crime imaginable. You step back toward the entrance and glance up the gentle slope of the dome. At its peak, a narrow vent lets a sliver of sunlight pierce the darkness. The beam catches a piece of quartz embedded in the upper wall, casting a faint glimmer on the ground below. Even the light in here feels cooler. You exit slowly, eyes blinking against the bright sun. And that's when you realize, this one yakchul isn't alone. Across the valley, half a dozen domes rise like earthbound stars, some still in use. Others partially collapsed, revealing their layered construction like slices of a cake built by engineers. Together, they form an ancient refrigeration network. An ice grid, if you will. In some cities, these domes were connected to Kinatso's underground water channels you met earlier. Cold water was redirected beneath the yakchul floor, boosting the chill from below. The most advanced systems even let workers adjust airflow and shade throughout the day. Using simple mechanical shutters and clay barriers, the logistics mind-blowing. Ice had to be harvested, transported, stacked, and maintained across months, all without electric tools. Just pulleys, levers, ropes, and the raw determination of a people who decided hot weather wasn't going to stop them from being cozy. Your guide chuckles softly and points to the mountains in the distance. That's where the ice caravans came from. In the dead of winter, teams would journey into the peaks, cut ice from frozen lakes or snowfields, and wrap it in straw, wool, or thick reeds before hauling it down. The trip had to be fast. Sunlight was the enemy. One wrong turn, One delay, and the precious cargo would melt away. But when they made it, oh, the celebration. Ice was more than a novelty. It was a symbol, a sign of order, power, and mastery over nature. And by building yakshials, Persia sent a clear message to the sun: not today. You pause, shading your eyes, and realize that some of these structures 2,000 years old are still standing, still cool, still usable. Their walls barely chipped, their mortars intact. Long after empires fell, after battles were lost and languages changed, the ice domes remained. Waiting, that's the magic of Persian design. Not loud, not flashy, just clever, durable, and deeply human. Historians still debate the true origin of the yakshial. Some believe they emerged from pre-Achaemenid rural villages, passed down as folk knowledge. Others argue they were commissioned by the royal state to support court luxury and food preservation. And there's always the fringe theory that nomadic peoples invented them independently in mountain regions before the urban centers adopted and perfected the form. Whatever the case, one thing is clear. They were ahead of their time, way ahead. You find yourself lying back again in the sand, the dome to your left, the wind to your right. A soft breeze, cooler than before, rolls across your cheeks. You think about how many hands built that dome, how many days it took, how many summers it endured. And most of all, you think about ice cream, because once you have the dome, once you have the cold, well, there's only one thing left to do: scoop. You're up before dawn this time. The desert hasn't quite woken yet. The air is still, almost respectful. Stars linger overhead like scattered thoughts, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster is debating whether it's worth the effort today. You wrap yourself in a thin shawl and follow a group of silhouettes making their way out of the village, all heading in the same direction with quiet urgency and bundled tools slung over shoulders. Tonight is the harvest. Not of wheat, not of grapes or olives. Tonight, you help gather eyes that most delicate and unlikely of desert crops. You walk silently alongside the others. It's a strange procession. Farmers with pickaxes, teenagers with wide reed baskets, an elder carrying a bundle of straw insulation on his back. Everyone looks serious, focused, the kind of mood you'd expect at a royal inspection or a delicate surgery. Because when the temperature dips low enough, and it's only for a few nights each year, the Persian people grow winter. You arrive at the edge of a shallow basin. It's flat and wide, like a dried-up lake bed carved by careful hands. But it's not dry tonight. Thin sheets of water shimmer under the moonlight, spread evenly across the basin like a glass table. The water's only a few fingers deep on purpose. Thin layers freeze faster, more efficiently. That's the trick. These ice fields were engineered centuries ago, placed to catch the coldest night air in winter. No artificial refrigeration. No assistance from machines. Just earth, water, and time. You crouch down and touch the surface. A crisp sheet of ice has formed, fragile but smooth. One of the men taps it gently with a wooden stick. A crack zigzags across the surface. That's your cue. Everyone springs into action. Wooden poles, chisels, and flat scoops come out. There's no shouting, just the soft sheck of ice being broken into manageable slabs. A young girl lifts a piece like a dinner tray and passes it to her brother, who gently lowers it into a straw-lined basket. The colder the night, the thicker the harvest. And this night, it's been generous. You join in, carefully sliding broken ice toward a low sledge. It's heavy, slippery, and your fingers quickly go numb. But your chest warms with the strangeness of it, harvesting ice under desert stars. It's like stealing treasure from a place that shouldn't have any. Historians agree that this method of freezing water in open-air pans was an ingenious workaround. In ancient Persia's arid climate, temperatures could swing wildly from day to night. A 95 degrees Fahrenheit day might be followed by a 28 degrees Fahrenheit night. They took advantage of that. The trick was knowing when the cold was coming and being ready. Once enough ice is gathered, the team starts stacking it. carefully, quietly, blocked by shimmering block, inside thick straw wrappings, each layer cushioned to avoid cracks. These bundles are then hoisted onto sleds pulled by oxen or donkeys. The real challenge? Moving it before the sun starts creeping over the ridge. You watch the first sliver of orange begin to poke through the sky. Suddenly, the pace quickens. Boots scuffle. Straps are tightened. Ice bundles disappear beneath heavy cloth coverings. The caravan begins to move, slow but determined, toward the nearest yaktel, the same dome you visited yesterday. As you walk beside the caravan, you can't help but think about how much planning this all took. Someone had to track weather patterns. Someone had to oversee water flow into the basins. Someone had to organize labor, carry supplies, and arrange safe passage to the ice pits. This wasn't a casual errand. It was infrastructure, tradition, science, maybe even survival. And there's something else. You notice one of the bundles bears a painted symbol, an eagle inside a circle. The older man leading the caravan spots you looking. He leans close and whispers, "For the Queen's table." You raise your eyebrows. Ice delivered straight to the palace. He nods and grins. She likes her sherbet very cold. You imagine it in some distant courtyard. A royal servant pouring pomegranate syrup over crushed mountain ice, offering it to a queen reclining beneath silken shade. Maybe a poet recites verses nearby. Maybe a musician plucks at a lyre. The ice melts slightly as she sips, and everyone nods approvingly, because even royalty knows the magic of chilled dessert. And you're helping deliver that magic. By mid-morning, the caravan reaches the yakshal. The air outside is already heating up, but inside, that precious cold waits patiently. You help unload the bundles, carefully unwrap them. Lower the slabs into the pit with ropes and polished wooden sleds. Some pieces are layered with herbs mint, rose petals, even bits of lavender. This isn't just storage, it's infusion. A preparation for later desserts. Once the final block is secured, someone lowers a shallow clay dish over the top layer. A slow drizzle of saffron water follows. The scent fills the dome. Sweet, spiced, luxurious, and just like that, winter is tucked away until the next banquet. But you're not done yet. Back outside, one of the younger workers waves you over to a nearby alcova shaded stall lined with crates of fruit. Grapes, plums, melons, all ripe, all slightly shriveled from the heat, and all in desperate need of a cold friend. This is the second purpose of the ice harvest: preservation. You help pack the crates with chipped ice, sealing them in lined baskets with layers of linen and waxed reeds. These will be carried to the market, 2 temples, 2 rich households tucked away in shaded courtyards. Some of the ice won't even last the trip. But that's expected. That's the cost of luxury. And occasionally, something funny happens. According to a few odd fragments of record, some on clay tablets, others from Arab scholars, centuries later, there were ice smugglers. People who accidentally diverted a block or two from official deliveries. Sometimes they set up temporary chill tents outside major cities, selling cold fruit or minted snow to eager passers-by. Totally illegal. Probably totally delicious. You look at the rising sun, now full and hot and blinding, and realize just how miraculous the whole thing is. A civilization that spent its nights freezing water and its mornings hiding it from the sun. A society that made ice part of its rhythm, woven into the structure of daily life, economy, celebration. One Persian poem, passed down orally for generations, even describes a summer wedding where the bride's hands are bathed in snow water from the north. No one's quite sure if it's a metaphor or a literal description, but either way, the message is the same. Cold was sacred. Cold was wonder. Cold was art. You find a bit of shade and take a long sip from a copper cup filled with crushed ice, sour cherry syrup, and a sprig of basil. It burns and soothes at the same time. Somewhere nearby, a bird calls out from the rooftop of a quiet house. This moment, like the ice you just stacked, is fleeting. But that's the beauty of it. The Persians knew how to make winter last, just long enough to taste it, and you're only beginning to learn. You wake to laughter. It's a kind of soft, early morning laughter that echoes through a courtyard. Someone cracking a joke while grinding cardamom. Someone else teasing a neighbor who still hasn't swept their doorstep. But most of all, you hear clinking. Metal on clay, wooden paddles scraping stone bowls. There's something in the air that smells cold and sweet. You follow the scent. Through a narrow corridor, past a fountain that gurgles sleepily into a courtyard humming with motion. In the center stands a tall churn, its bronze sides dark with condensation. A man leans over it, rhythmically turning a handle, his arms moving in a hypnotic rhythm. Nearby, a young girl fans a block of ice resting inside a shallow stone basin. Thin curls of fog rise from it like ghost breath. Welcome to the ice cream ritual. And yes, this is the moment you've been waiting for. They don't call it ice cream, not exactly. It's Bastani Sanati, which translates to traditional ice cream, but that doesn't quite do it justice. You peek inside the churn. The mixture isn't fluffy, it's elastic, almost chewy. The base is milk and cream, but it's infused with rosewater, saffron, vanilla, and wait for it, salep. The dried root of a wild orchid that thickens it into something that stretches like soft silk. You're handed a small cup. Your fingers chill against the glazed pottery. A few slivers of pistachio float on top, nestled in golden folds. You take a bite. It's cold. Colder than expected, but also floral. Earthy, spicy in the way. Cinnamon is spicy warm, but without heat. There's no sugar rush, no artificial aftertaste. Just a long, unfolding coolness that spreads behind your teeth and down your throat like a whisper of snow. You lean back against a wall and exhale. Bastani isn't just dessert, it's an experience. In Persia, making bastani was a craft. A mixture was churned by hand in metal drums surrounded by ice, spun slowly over hours. Sometimes salt was added to the ice to lower the freezing point and speed the process, a chemical trick that predates chemistry books. Salt water absorbs heat from the cream as it freezes, pulling warmth away from the mixture until it sets. Thermodynamics, 1000 BCE edition. But back to the salep. That strange root isn't just for thickening. It gives the bastani its unique stretch, a kind of dessert elasticity you can't find in your corner store freezer. You can tug a spoonful and watch it pull like taffy before snapping off with a cool, creamy sigh. This same technique exists today in Turkish dondurma, which also uses salep. There's a scholarly debate naturally over who first discovered this magical orchid flower. Did Persia pass it to Anatolia? Did traders from Central Asia bring it west? Some argue the dessert evolved independently in both regions. Others suspect sneaky ice-obsessed chefs swapped recipes during royal feasts. Either way, it worked. A boy walks past you, balancing a tray of cold drinks. More faluda, rosewater slush, and something new, sharbat. It's made with cold water, sugar, lime, and fresh mint. Sometimes basil, sometimes sour cherry. Always served chilled, always sipped slowly, as if each drop deserves its own spotlight. And there, beside the ice block, someone is pressing grape must into a thick, pulpy syrup. It'll be cooled with snow and served in tiny glasses like liquid amethyst. For Persians, icy treats weren't rare indulgences, they were ritualized. Tied to festivals, family meals, afternoon gossip, and moonlit evenings. You're invited to help with the next batch. A wide clay bowl is placed on a spinning turntable. You pour in the milk mixture, then carefully begin to rotate it slowly, steadily. Another person sprinkles saffron threads, letting the heat of the liquid bloom the spice into tiny golden veins. Someone else crushes pistachios, murmuring about the right size of crumble, as if discussing philosophy. You learn that some bastani recipes even included mastic, a resin from the mastic tree. It added a faint, piney note and made the texture even stretchier. To be honest, It sounds like something a tree would sue over being turned into ice cream, but it's delicious. Then, someone brings out a cooled mortar made of marble. Inside, a fragrant paste of saffron and rose petals. It smells like a wedding in a snowstorm. You're shown how to blend the paste into the churn, folding it slowly, like coaxing silk into a dream. And then, as the mixture firms, you begin to understand. This isn't just about beating the heat. It's about celebrating the momentary miracle of coolness in a place where the sun wins 364 days out of the year. You look around, everyone's smiling. No one's in a rush. Someone is telling a story about a poet who composed an ode to Faluda after getting dumped. Another swears that cold desserts help the mind stay sharp, which might be the oldest excuse for ice cream binging in history. Nearby, you hear another tale, more serious one. A few centuries ago, a royal courtier was said to have sabotaged another noble's ice storage by cracking open his actual dome. The resulting thaw melted half the year's dessert supply before the crime was discovered. There was outrage, possibly a duel, definitely a lot of yelling. And, one imagines, some very tepid sherbet at the next banquet. As the sun rises higher, the courtyard becomes a little more shaded. The churn continues. Bowls are swapped, new flavors appear. Sour orange, quince, sandalwood, melon, wait, sandalwood. Yes, turns out Persian cold treats weren't just about sweetness. They were meant to refresh the spirit. Light bitterness, earthy notes, even floral bitterness, these were prized. The goal wasn't to overwhelm your mouth, but to balance the senses. And in a world of crushing heat and dry air, that balance was priceless. The bastani you had earlier. That was just the beginning. In royal feasts, guests were sometimes served 5 or 6 different cold dishes in succession each, one paired with specific fruits, nuts, and sips of sharbat in between. Think ancient tasting menu, minus the tiny foam blobs and waiters describing things as deconstructed. And sometimes, dessert wasn't even the highlight. Imagine an appetizer of yogurt and mint chilled with ice followed by spiced lamb stew, cooled with snow, and ending with a frozen almond pudding eaten in the shade while a musician plays the tar under a canopy of fig trees. It's not dinner, it's poetry with silverware. As the afternoon deepens and the churning slows, someone offers you one last treatchak, Darby Hesht, or ice in paradise, a kind of frozen custard with rice flour, milk, and cardamom. More subtle, more comforting, like eating snow that read you a bedtime story first. You lean back, bowl in hand, thinking how much this all defies your expectations. The desert was supposed to be dry, lifeless, sunburned. Instead, it's filled with inventiveness, patience, celebration, and above all, cold things made with warm hearts. You watch as the final batch of bastani is wrapped and lowered into a reed-lined container. It'll be delivered to a local shrine later tonight, part of a festival ritual that honors Mithra, the ancient god of contracts, light, and the rising dawn. Some believe ice was offered to him as a symbol of renewal. Others think it was just a treat for temple guests. Historians still argue whether dessert was spiritual or just deeply satisfying. Either way, you're happy to take another bite. The churn goes quiet. A lazy cat yawns beside the ice basin. And somewhere beyond the courtyard, the wind rustles through date palms, bringing just the faintest hint of coolness with it. The ice cream melts slowly on your tongue, and you realize you've never felt more awake in the desert. You sleep through the heat of the day, curled in the corner of a shaded room, the thick adobe walls doing their job without complaint. When you wake, the sun is lower, burning less like a fire and more like a warm memory. You stretch, step into your sandals, and find a trail of lamplit lanterns winding out of the city toward the hills. Tonight, you're following a festival. It's not grand or royal. It's not something with parades or speeches. Just a quiet local ritual known as Yalda Nightin, ancient celebration of the winter solstice. the longest night of the year. And, naturally, a night when ice and cold treats take on their deepest symbolic meaning. You walk with others carrying platters of pomegranates, nuts, dried figs, and, tucked carefully beneath folds of linen, small bowls of frozen treats preserved in layers of straw. Carried all day from the yakshul to the hilltop for this exact moment. Yalda night has Zoroastrian roots, but even after centuries and countless cultural shifts, its bones remain the same, staying up late to outlast the darkness, sharing food, reading poetry, telling stories, and always preparing something cold to remind you that light returns. You settle beside a low fire. The stars come out, and someone begins to recite from the Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings, a tale of Rostam and Soharba, tragedy, fate, valor, all the good stuff. And when the storyteller pauses, someone else passes around cups of ice-cooled sharbat lime, sour cherry, a hint of mint. The cold stings your teeth, wakes you up just as the story reaches its sorrowful end. There's something especially magical about sipping ice on a freezing night, a kind of shared absurdity. You're already cold, but now it's a chosen cold. A reminder that warmth, when it returns, will mean something. A teenage boy beside you holds up a thin slice of frozen watermelon, grinning like he's discovered fire. You eat yours slowly, letting it melt just behind your tongue. And you think about the thousands of people across Persia doing the same thing right now, honoring the longest night with chilled fruit and frozen joy. And here's where it gets wonderfully weird. Some Yalda traditions mention that eating something frozen on this night protects you from illness for the next year. Ice is more than comfort, it's medicine. There are whispered references in herbalist texts from the Sasanian period about freezing infusions. Rose, camphor, even pounded lotus seeds, believed to seal the inner fire and prevent fevers. One text, translated poorly centuries later, describes a concoction called the Cold Star's Blessing, possibly an early version of Faluda with added myrtle and fennel. Historians argue whether it was actually consumed or used ritually, placed on altars with smoke and recitation. But you like to imagine both. A priest sipping icy noodles by torchlight, contemplating the stars. Someone nearby begins reading poetry Hafez, of course. A few verses in, and you swear even the fire slows down to listen. His lines drift into the sky like steam. Last night, I dreamed of snow in Shiraz, and your hands, colder than longing, burned brighter than summer's rose. The group falls quiet. There's no applause. Just the gentle rattle of ice in shallow cups, the soft scrape of someone cutting more melon, and the wind passing through the dry grass like it has nowhere else to be. You lie back on the cool earth, thinking, it's no accident this night, this exact time of year, is so full of cold symbolism. To ancient Persians, surviving the dark wasn't just a practical matter. It was cosmic, a triumph. And what better way to remind yourself that you've made it than to taste the impossible, ice. In the heart of winter, in the middle of a desert. You close your eyes and think about the layers of preparation it took to make this night happen. Months ago, teams were hauling ice from mountaintops, carving it, wrapping it, hiding it in deep domes. Then, slowly, over the course of autumn, it was tapped for rituals like this. Not wasted, not gobbled, but shared, celebrated, measured like moonlight. A young girl holds up her bowl and asks for a second helping of the ice custard mixture. Her grandfather chuckles and tells her the old superstition. Too much cold and your dreams will freeze. She pouts. He caves. Everyone laughs. You take another sip of sharbat. The sour cherry hits like a soft bell in your mouth, sharp and round at the same time. Your bowl is filled with faluda this time, the thin noodles slippery, half melted in a bath of lime and rose. You swirl your spoon absent-mindedly, letting the texture slide across your tongue. Someone nearby tells a story about a man who claimed he could make ice cream with moonlight. He built a mirror-lined pit, waited for the full moon, and left his mixture uncovered beneath it. It froze. They say no ice, no salt, just moon and belief. Scholars dismiss it as folklore, but your heart kind of wants it to be true. Because the truth is, cold in ancient Persia wasn't just physics, it was spiritual. Zoroastrians believed that fire was holy, but so was water, and by extension, ice was something close to divine balance. Frozen water was preserved purity, a symbol of both life's fragility and its preservation. It was a gift from the mountain gods, captured and carried by human hands. Consuming it wasn't just cooling down, it was communing with something bigger than yourself. As the fire burns low and a few people begin to doze off against cushions, you realize the night is passing faster than it feels. The cold air brushes your skin, but you don't shiver. Your body is full of warmth and cold at the same time. Like the country itself, always balancing extremes. You reach into a basket and find a final sweet, a small cube of frozen rose jelly pressed with gold leaf. You press it to your tongue and let it melt as the wind shifts again. Somewhere down the hill, a yakshul sits quietly, guarding the last of this year's harvest. Somewhere up above, a star blinks like a wink. You made it through the longest night, and in the morning, the sun will return. Morning stretches its arms across the hills. You blink against the soft gold light, the kind that only happens when the sun rises slowly, as if it too stayed up too late telling stories. The fire has burned down to warm ash. People around you are beginning to stir, yawning under blankets, rubbing their eyes, stretching beside last night's cushions. The scent of cooled rose syrup and lingering ember smoke hangs in the air like perfume from a dream you can still half remember. You made it through the longest night, and now it's market day. You follow the winding path back down into the valley, past low adobe homes and date palms that whisper softly overhead. As you near the city's edge, the sound picks up livestock braying, haggling voices, the clap of sandals on stone. It's not chaos, it's a rhythm, the heartbeat of ancient commerce. You step into the bazaar. Immediately, you're wrapped in sensation, the color of dyed fabrics hanging like waterfalls from shaded stalls, the smell of saffron and roasted nuts, the faint glisten of wet stone where someone's just poured a pitcher of water to keep the dust down. Somewhere nearby, someone is slicing open a melon chilled in ice. A boy runs past you, holding a bundle of frozen noodles wrapped in linen, shouting something about a courtyard feast. Even here in the noise, the commerce, the bustle has made its way in. You slow down at a stall where a man is selling cold bundles wrapped in reeds. He catches your eye and pulls one open to reveal a bowl of ice-stored yogurt, thick, tangy, and flecked with herbs. This, he says proudly, was kept all night in the shade cellars beneath the market, built atop canot tunnels that funnel cool air even at midday. You dip a finger in. It's genuinely cold. The kenots again. This invisible network, these underground veins, carry more than water. They're the lifeblood of preservation. Markets like this one were often built on top of them, so vendors could store perishables in semi-subterranean nooks cooled by the earth and by airflow drawn in through distant wind catchers. You walk past another stall, this one offering thin slices of ice-cooled citrus sprinkled with crushed, dried rose petals. You pop one into your mouth and immediately feel the jolt of temperature and taste. It's a simple treat, but in a place like this, it borders on luxury. And that's the thing. Cold wasn't always for kings. Yes, the courts had the biggest yakshuls. Yes, royals bathed in rose-infused snowmelt and ordered sherbet by the cartful. But markets, these everyday spaces, were where the real innovation happened. Where cold goods were passed, stored, bargained for, even improvised. Take the ice cellars. In some cities, especially in the summer months, groups of ice traders would roam the bazaar carrying insulated crates filled with chipped ice. Their calls echoed off the domes. Snow for the melon, ice for your tongue. They'd sell by the handful. You'd pay in coin, or in kind, maybe a fig, maybe a thread of saffron. They kept ice alive, mobile, and shared. You reach a shaded corner where a wide stall sells only one thing: sherbets in clay cups. Dozens of them, each resting in a shallow trough filled with slushy water and ice chips. There's sour apple, licorice and honey, basil and cucumber. Even a version with fermented grape and vinegar, a taste that somehow feels both ancient and weirdly trendy. You pick the basil. The vendor smiles and drops in a tiny fragment of cold palm sap candy, telling you it wakes up the nose. You sip, and your whole mouth thanks you in 7 different languages. The idea of drinking something cold in this kind of place on a dusty morning, surrounded by goats and spices and the hum of bartering, should feel strange. But it doesn't. It feels perfect. Historians still debate how widespread ice was at the popular level. Was it truly accessible, or was this just a lucky market near a royal city? Some argue that rural communities rarely saw ice unless they lived near a highland. Others believe that smart storage and night-harvested ice made its way further than we think. There's even a quirky 10th century tale of a shepherd who kept a piece of mountain ice under his turban all day, just to cool his goat's milk for his children. Sounds ridiculous, but also believable. You keep wandering. A side street beckons, quieter than the main lanes. You find a series of small kitchen stalls where women are prepping dishes for the afternoon. One is pouring a chilled barley soup into bowls, ashy sard, flavored with mint and yogurt, cooled overnight with stones from a nearby stream. Another is slicing cold pickled vegetables that were brined with snow in clay crocks. Further down, someone is making kulfies, that frozen milk and spice dessert still popular today in South Asia. This version, or Persian style, flecked with saffron and frozen slowly in copper molds packed in salt and snow. You help turn the molds, rotating them inside a wooden churn. The rhythm is soothing, circular, like the sound of distant drums. Then, a voice pulls you aside. An elderly woman, seated in the shadow of a date palm, gestures toward a small wrapped parcel beside her. She opens it carefully and reveals something round, glossy, and semi-transparent. It's frozen cheese. Well, not quite cheese. It's kashka, kind of fermented yogurt product that's been chilled, dried, and shaped into discs. Some were even rolled in snow and sun-dried in cycles, preserving them for travel. Shepherds carried them. Soldiers sucked on them during long marches. They were sour, packed with protein, and if you asked her, tasted like courage. You try a piece. It does taste like something a heroic goat might approve of. And that's the lesson of this market. Cold wasn't just for dessert. It was preservation, nutrition, mobility, and sometimes pure stubbornness. A declaration that even in the driest, hottest, dustiest corners of the earth, people could find a way to bring coolness to the table. You buy a small pouch of crushed, dried mint cooled over ice. The vendor hands you a bonus, a chunk of date syrup frozen onto a stick like a prehistoric popsicle. You bite it, and it cracks like brittle. The bazaar stretches out behind you as you leave, glowing in the rising sun. The sounds fade. The heat begins to build again. And you realize you're walking toward something more official. Because this afternoon, you have a special invitation. You're going to a royal kitchen, and they're not just freezing milk and fruit up there. Oh no, they're doing something far fancier. The guards don't stop you. That's how you know this isn't your average kitchen. You step through a shaded archway lined with flowering vines and into a courtyard where even the dust seems polished. Marble glints beneath your feet. Fountains trickle in low, deliberate music. The scent of cinnamon, roasted almonds, and something unmistakably cold clings to the air like silk. This is the royal kitchen, not just a place of food, but a center of precision, pageantry, and occasionally petty ice-fueled drama. You're led through a second arch where the temperature drops noticeably. No magic here, just clever design. Thick walls, deep shade, and airflow from nearby canot-fed ducks keep this wing of the palace cool. even as the afternoon sun burns outside. A tall clay jar at the doorway sweats with condensation. What you touches? It's icy. A servant offers you a small porcelain bowl of faluda. Yes, again. But this version is unlike the other's thinner noodles, a faint, smoky sweetness, and something crunchy floating inside. Candied lotus seed. Crushed almond resin? You can't tell. You're not even sure it matters, because now you're watching ice cream be performed. At the center of the prep room, two men are cranking a double-barreled brass churn that sits nested inside a larger basin of salt and snow. The mixture inside is already beginning to pull into elastic ribbons. One of the cooks dips a copper ladle in and lifts it high. The stream doesn't break, it stretches, then snaps back like soft glass. Welcome to the Bastani Ballet. This particular recipe includes rosewater, saffron, mastic, masala paz. You've seen before, but here, proportions are everything. One apprentice, face serious as an astrologer, stirs a syrup so slowly you think time has stopped. Another grates ice into powder using a silver plate with holes so fine it looks like embroidery. Every element is tracked, timed, and tasted. Then the chief cook steps in. He's older, eyes sharp, mustache meticulous. His robe is embroidered with cooling herbs, mint, tarragon, dill. Possibly symbolic, possibly just on theme. He inspects the churn, scoops a tiny bite, and closes his eyes. Silence, then a nod. The room exhales. This batch will be served to the Queen Mother during the evening meal. And if you think that sounds dramatic, oh, just wait. Royal kitchens in ancient Persia weren't just busy. They were competitive ecosystems. Prestige came not just from spices or rare meats, but from temperature control. The better you were at managing cold, the closer you were to the center of influence. There are records, half official, half gossipy scrolls of chefs being demoted for letting ice melt too quickly, of courtiers swapping cooled fruit with slightly warmer ones just to discredit a rival. There's even a half-believable tale of a kitchen servant hiding inside a yakchul to avoid punishment after oversalting a custard. You're invited to help plate the final dish. The bastani is scooped into small gold-leafed bowls and topped with crushed pistachio, dried cherry petals, and a faint dusting of powdered saffron. Then, most dazzling of all, one chef lowers a silver mesh globe into a vat of near-frozen rose syrup, lets it harden, and then cracks it over the bowls like a delicate sugar snow. Tiny flakes land across the top, melting just slightly. You're offered one. It's not just ice cream anymore, it's frozen perfume. As the dishes are lifted onto silver trays and carried off to the upper chambers, you stay behind to explore a bit more. One small annex room is dedicated entirely to ice-based ingredients. Crates of preserved fruit, jars of ice-infused vinegar, even a sealed chest of frozen quince pulp reserved, you're told, for serious occasions. You don't ask. Historians still argue whether these culinary innovations came from Persian roots or were adopted and modified through Silk Road exchange. Some argue the elasticity of bastani has Indian influence. Others trace its texture to Arabic frozen milk dishes. And of course, there are always the fringe historians who swear that Mongol invaders brought dairy-free ice desserts packed in snow-gored shells. It's all possible. After all, royal kitchens were global laboratories. Recipes traveled in the pockets of ambassadors, monks, and the occasional homesick princess. Cold, sweet things had no borders, only ingredients, methods, and secrets. You step into the back corridor and discover something unexpected. Ice storage within the palace itself. A smaller yakchul, discreet and heavily guarded, embedded beneath the north wing. The floor is tiled in glazed blue stone, and the air is shockingly crisp. You see a servant carrying in small blocks of ice wrapped in waxed cloth. These are for tonight's banquet, where cold is not merely flavor, it's theater. Back in the main kitchen, the final preparations begin for an elaborate dish called yak dar anbar, literally ice in the chamber. You peek into the preparation. A savory cold dish made of shredded chicken, pickled grape leaves, herbs, and chilled spiced rice, all layered in a glazed ceramic bowl and set over a bed of cracked ice. Not your usual definition of cool food, but somehow it works. And then the palace priest arrives. He's here not for food, but for ritual. Because in the royal court, certain frozen treats were used in ceremonies. A small bowl of iced water, stirred with saffron and pomegranate bark, is blessed and distributed among select courtiers to cool their thoughts. Before important decisions, you're offered a taste it's sharp, bitter, and leaves your lips feeling oddly numb. A nearby scroll references a mysterious substance called barficifit, or white snow, believed to be harvested only from mountaintops during a lunar eclipse. It was reserved for the royal physician, who used it to make snow lozenges mixed with honey and asafoetida. Scholars today can't agree if it was real or poetic exaggeration. But standing in this kitchen, with rose ice dripping from your spoon, you think? Maybe it was real after all. As the sun begins to lower and shadows stretch across the tile floors, the staff preps the final touchy fruit. Actual fruit. Not quite. These are molds of sugar and pectin cast in the shape of peaches and figs, filled with frozen custard and painted to look exactly like the real thing. They're served chilled on leaves beside the actual fruit to test who can tell the difference. You can't. Someone hands you a scroll detailing the banquet menu. It reads like a frozen symphony. Chilled apricot soup with mint oil, bastani with honey glass, grape leaf parcels on ice pebbles, almond rose lozenges infused with snow water. Faluda served in halved lemons, frozen with salt brine. And for the finale, the lion's tongue, a dessert shaped like a lion's head, but actually soft mango and saffron ice curled into ribbons. You sigh deeply and happily, not just because you're full, but because the palace kitchen has revealed what the ice domes and desert fields couldn't. That cold, in the right hands, becomes something close to divine. Not just a defense against heat, but a canvas, a stage, a whisper that lingers long after the last bite. You step outside into the twilight. The air is still warm, but your skin is cool. Your breath feels steadier. Somewhere, a flute plays. And tomorrow, you're told you'll be riding north to follow the trail of the ice caravans. Back to the mountains, where this all begins. You're packed onto the back of a mule. Not your usual morning routine, but when the royal steward says, "We leave before the heat finds us," you don't ask for a carriage. Instead, you sit with your bundle of supplies bread wrapped in linen, a pouch of dried quince, and a small flask of Charpentand. Sway gently as the caravan begins its quiet upward journey toward the mountains. This isn't just a scenic detour. You're following the ice trail, the ancient and astonishing network of trade and transport that brought frozen wonders down from the highlands to the cities. Not a single icy miracle in Persia would exist without this quiet chain of effort. The climbers, cutters, haulers, and handlers who made cold commerce possible. The mule crunches over dry gravel. The landscape slowly changes palms, giving way to olive groves thinning into scrub, scrub fading into stone and wind. The air shifts too, less sun-baked, more crisp, cooler. You pull your shawl tighter and glance up. There on the distant slope you spot it. A snowfield, still stubbornly clinging to the rocky folds of a high ridge, glowing white under the morning light. This is where the journey begins. You arrive at a small outpost. It's just a few stone huts, a corral for animals, a arena where men are sharpening tools. But near the edge, 3 men are working around what looks like a pit in the ground. You walk closer and see it. A glacier cave, partially exposed, partially covered by stone and straw. Within, blocks of ancient ice gleam in the shade. A man chips at the block with practiced grace. He nods to you, then gestures toward the cave's opening. You peek in. Cold air hits you like a memory from winter. Inside, blocks of ice, some crystal clear, some cloudy with snow, are being carved into rectangular slabs. Then, wrapped in burlap, soaked in brine to insulate them for transport. It's quiet work, reverent, almost. These ice harvesters are part of a lineage older than most dynasties. The tools haven't changed much. Hand chisels, wooden paddles, carts with iron wheels. The work is exhausting, dangerous, and yet, every year, they return. Why? Because cities depend on them. Shrines depend on them. Even the poets in the capital who write verses about chilled pomegranate syrup wouldn't be so smug if these men stayed home. One of the workers explains how they gauge the right ice to harvest. It must be thick, but not brittle. Some say the best ice is blue as a well and silent as a grave. You don't ask what happens if the cave collapses. You just nod and hand him a strip of dried fig. You're invited to help. Not with the carving, that's sacred, but with the packing. Slabs of ice are layered with sawdust and straw in deep wooden crates. The crates are sealed, wrapped again in oiled linen, and strapped to oxen-drawn sleds. A single team may carry hundreds of kilos down the slope. Slowly, deliberately, like carrying treasure that melts if you blink too hard. Historians still debate the scale of this system. Was it wide-reaching? Seasonal only? Were there established ice roads with royal protection, or were these informal networks tied to local patronage? Some believe there were even ice taxes, where mountain villages had to supply a quota to the crown. Others argue it was private trade, controlled by elite families who passed down secret routes and packing methods. Whatever the truth, the logistics are mind-boggling. Imagine coordinating the route, the temperatures, the resting points, the supply stations. One missed turn, and a week's worth of ice becomes a very expensive puddle. And this was all happening centuries before thermometers, before climate modeling, before GPS. You ask one of the haulers how he knows the safest way down. He shrugs and says, "The wind tells me." Then he laughs, points to a ridgeline, and adds, "And the vultures tell me where not to go." Fair enough. The caravan begins its descent in the late afternoon, when the sun dips low and shadows stretch like cats across the rocks. You ride behind the first sled, watching the crate sway as the oxen plod down a narrow switchback path. You pass the occasional ice cache small pits dug into shaded rock, reinforced with stone, lined with straw. Temporary waypoints where blocks can rest overnight. They look like graves for forgotten winters. At one stop, you discover a peculiar structure. A short, squat tower with a dome top and a grated opening facing north. Inside, the air is remarkably cool. A hauler explains this is an ice trap, a windcatcher dome built just for holding ice during transit. They're rare, mostly experimental, and not always successful. Sometimes, he says with a grin, the wind changes its mind. The further you descend, the warmer the air becomes. You sip from your flask, thankfully still cool, and wonder how often this journey ended in failure. A broken crate, a warm patch of valley, a storm, and yet they kept doing it. Kept hauling winter into summer, year after year, as if defying the desert itself. You ask why. One of the haulers doesn't answer at first. Then he says, because it makes the children laugh. You think about that? About how the simplest, coldest thing could bring such joy. How somewhere in the city below, a grandmother is preparing saffron falude for her granddaughter's birthday. That icy bite, carried on the backs of animals, through mountain passes chipped from caves by men who sleep beside frozen slabs. At the next camp, a small fire is lit. Dinner is passed around: flatbread, pickled garlic, dried yogurt, wafers softened in water. You sit in the fading blue light, belly warm, hands chilled from moving one to many straw bundles. Then, from one of the crates, a hauler pulls out a thin slab of ice and passes it to a young boy. The boy lays it flat on a plate and starts shaving it with a copper coin. Onto it, he pours a syrup of wild mountain mulberries, thick and dark and tangy. You're handed a bowl. You eat it slowly. It tastes like elevation, like distance, like work, but also like celebration. You lie back, head against your pack, listening to the wind move through the pines. Somewhere behind you, the glacier waits for the next season. Somewhere ahead, a city waits for its next block of magic. You're halfway between two worlds. And you're starting to see how ice is more than a material, it's a message, a declaration, a promise that some things are worth preserving, even when the sun insists otherwise. The stars come out, and the haulers sleep. You close your eyes beside the ice, and in the distance, far below, the domes of the actuals glimmer under moonlight, waiting for their treasure to return. By morning, the oxen have gone quiet. They chew their grain with the patient rhythm of animals that know the road better than any map. The crates are resecured, the final ropes tightened, and the caravan continues its descent, not hurriedly, not lazily, but with a kind of practiced reverence. You're part of something ancient now, older than paper, older than ink, maybe even older than the idea of ownership. This is a tradition that carries cold through heat, silence through chatter, winter through summer. But where exactly does it all go? Well, today, it's not going to a royal kitchen or a courtyard feast. Today, the caravan turns off the main road and winds toward a small village shrine, one you would have missed if you blinked. No domes, no mosaics, just low walls made of stone and clay, wrapped in morning mist. But the people here are already waiting. They've been expecting the ice. Children rush forward, not to touch it, but to see it, like it's an honored guest. A few carry shallow bowls filled with flower petals and dried herbs. Others sing softly in a dialect you don't recognize, high, bird-like tones that bounce off the shrine walls and into the cool morning air. The crates are opened carefully. Not all of them, just one. Inside, packed in straw, wrapped in oiled cloth, is a single pristine block of mountain ice. You help carry it into the shrine, ducking through a low entrance. The space is dim, scented with myrrh and dried rose. A copper basin sits in the center of the floor. Into it, the ice is gently lowered. Petals are added. Then drops of saffron water, basil oil, and something bitter you can't identify. This isn't a snack. This is sacred. For some villages, especially in older times, ice wasn't just a luxury or a trade item, it was a ritual medium. Frozen water, harvested from mountaintops, was believed to carry spiritual purity, a connection to both the divine cold of the heavens and the hidden depth of the earth. The people here believe this ice can cleanse dreams, cool fevers of the soul, and bless the soil before planting. A local elder explains that in their tradition, the ice is allowed to melt in the shrine basin, and then it's used to anoint the doorways of homes, poured into wells, and mixed into ointments for newborns. You ask if they eat it? The elder smiles. No, this ice is for remembering where we come from. It's a curious thing. Back in the cities, ice is twisted into ribbon deserts, mixed with saffron, folded into syruped masterpieces. But out here, it's still a mystery. Revered, not commodified. Almost not even fully understood. Just respected. You step outside and notice something else. A small plaque beside the shrine, carved with a faded inscription. The language is Old Persian, but the meaning is roughly this. From the breath of the mountain comes mercy. Let no flame mock it. Let no tongue rush it. May it reach you whole. You think about that as the villagers begin a second ritual. This time, it's more playful. Children form a line and take turns touching the ice with their wrists, then quickly pulling back. Gasps, laughter, a game. But with undertones of something older, like they're letting the cold remind them of something too big to speak out loud. Later, one of the haulers pulls you aside and hands you a small leather pouch. Inside are ice coins, round, flat discs of snow and resin pressed between layers of linen and dried in shaded caves. Not technically frozen now, but once melted, they can be rehydrated into a cooling herbal drink. Therefore trade, he explains, but some folks keep them for weddings. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Cold things make warm memories. As the sun climbs higher, the last of the ceremonial ice is divided into small chunks. A group of women carries one piece to a nearby orchard, where it's placed at the roots of an apricot tree. Another piece goes into a stone trough to cool drinking water for travelers. One is used to press fresh herbs into a paste that's said to chase fever out the soles of your feet. Historians still argue about how far these rituals really went. Were they religious, medicinal, folklore? Was the mountain ice truly sacred, or just practical enough to seem sacred in retrospect? Some think these village rites were symbolic echoes of Zoroastrian fire-water balance, filtered through generations. Others suggest they're independent to rising from natural law. Because, let's be honest, if someone handed you a block of snow in the middle of a sand-colored valley, wouldn't you whisper a thank you? The caravan repacks what remains and begins the final stretch back to the city. You follow on foot now, the path smooth and shaded in parts, lined with pomegranate trees and the occasional domed storage hutchactyl siblings, smaller than their urban cousins, but no less dignified. At one stop, you see a man placing bowls of herbs inside a shallow clay pit, then covering them with a thin sheet of ice. He's not making dessert, he's steeping medicine. The cold, he explains, helps preserve the volatile oils in the herbs. Heat makes them escape. Cold makes them stay. You'd never thought of ice as preservation for scent, but there it is. A fragrant science without a lab coat in sight. By evening, you return to the city, not to the royal courtyard, but to the communal garden near the canot-fed pool. There, families are gathering for a weekly event that translates loosely to cooling hour. They bring out folding mats, jars of sharbat, frozen melons, even blocks of compressed snow sugar they shave into wide platters. Children build little mounds of snow and decorate them with hibiscus petals. Grandmothers tell stories of when ice came in secret, like a blessing wrapped in linen. You sit beside a man churning a batch of what he calls Serebiashna friends drink. It's a kind of salty cucumber sherbet, kept cold with pebble ice and served in small stone bowls with sprigs of mint and crushed walnut. You sip. It tastes like someone just wiped summer off your face. You look up, the moon is rising, quiet and full. The wind carries the scent of cold syrup, dust, and saffron. And the ice, still humming with memory, slowly melts. You wake up surrounded by stone. The city is asleep, but not silence somewhere in the distance. Water trickles through canot channels. A donkey brays once and is quiet again, and a soft wind drags loose sand across tiled rooftops. You're resting near the edge of a public square, where last night's cooling hour left the scent of sweet herbs and frozen syrup in the air. And today's 4 stories. Not just the kind you've been told, but the ones people wear, sing, and pass down with the help of ice. You're headed to a caravanserai sprawling roadside in turn semi-permanent market of ideas, gossip, goods, and food, of course. Here, travelers rest, share tales, and try to outdo each other in whatever's fashionable at the moment. Today, that means boasting about whose village makes the coldest dessert. You pass under the high archway, painted with flaking stars and ancient verses, and step into the shaded courtyard. Inside, vendors hawk saffron strands, blue-glazed pottery, glass beads from across the sea, and tucked in the corner. A trio of women standing around a shallow basin of crushed ice and shouting cheerfully over one another. It's an ice-off. Each woman claims her method keeps flavor longer. One uses a mix of salt, brine, and dried plum. Another swears by adding powdered myrtle bark. The third, she adds the ashes of burnt almond shelby, 'cause she says, cold likes a whisper of smoke. You don't even know if that's true, but it sounds like poetry. You try a sample from each. One is tangy, one floral, one tastes like memory dipped in snow. The audience laughs, claps, cheers. someone tosses a dried fig into the winner's basket. And this is when it clicks. Cold, for all its practical genius, has become something more cultural currency. Not just about keeping your food fresh, but about how you chill it, why, and what story you wrap it in. There's a traveler here from the far western provinces. He carries a scroll he says he bought from a passing monk. It contains a recipe in neat diagrams. For a sky churn, a tall glass cone with air holes and mirrored panels meant to freeze syrup using wind alone. Historians still argue whether these were real or theoretical. No one here has built one, but the traveler swears it works. Then, there's a storyteller with silver in his beard who spins a tale about a Persian merchant who traded saffron for ice in the Himalayas and returned with a wife who could make snow sing. The crowd listens, half smiling, half believing. And sitting nearby is a young boy painting on parchment with ice-stained ink made by boiling. Crushed pomegranate seeds in snow, water, and mixing it with dried orchid root. He says it fades in sunlight unless sealed with rose oil. Some stories, he says, are only for the cool hours. You blink. Did he really say that, or did you dream it? A woman with a harp begins to play a cold song, yes, an actual genre. These were lullabies sung during the heat of summer, meant to soothe children by describing glaciers, snowy mountains, and frozen fruits. One verse drifts through the courtyard. Let the snow sleep on your tongue. Let the ice sing through your teeth. Even the desert kneels when the cold god breathes. You feel a shiver not from the temperature, but from the way cold has woven itself into identity, into memory, into art. One merchant opens a tiny wooden box and reveals half a dozen ice token-etched glass coins used in old weddings. They weren't made of real ice, but they were kept cold before the ceremony, so they'd mist in the bride's palm. The idea was that a love kept cool would never burn out. You ask him if they still use them. He laughs. Only the romantic ones, or the foolish. You move deeper into the caravanserai, past archways and perfumed stalls, until you reach a shaded alcove lined with scrolls and folded linen books. A small gathering sits around a woman in scholar's robes, who's reading excerpts from a culinary treatise that's half recipe, half philosophical rant. It's titled Of the Noble Cold and the Proper Patience. She reads, "Do not chase cold as a thief chases shade. Let it come to you in stillness, and let your flavors earn its favor. He who boils what ought to freeze deserves neither." Everyone chuckles. Then someone asks the inevitable. So where did it come from? Who first froze a melon? How? The woman sighs and gives the only honest answer. No one knows. Historians still argue whether Persia truly invented ice cream or simply refined what older civilizations had stumbled into. China had frozen milk and rice slurries. Rome used snow and honey. But Persia gave it structure, purpose, flavor layers, ceremony. They didn't just freeze things. They made frozen things meaningful. You wander back through the courtyard, watching the interplay. Cold syrup passed to strangers, children rubbing melted snow on each other's cheeks, artists sketching yakshuls on scraps of linen. And above it all, the wind catchers turning slowly. Their design is beautiful and a little smug enchant air conditioning. Centuries before Freon, they pull the wind down, filter it through water channels, and release it as cool air into the halls below. You find yourself standing beneath one and letting the gentle draft play across your face. It's not cold, exactly, but it's enough. You sit at a low table with a few travelers and share a final dessert on walnut. Sherbet poured over frozen apricot mash. One of the men toasts with his cup and says, "To the ones who carried ice on their backs and called it poetry." You clink. And as the heat of the day creeps back, and the caravanserai begins its slow fade into the drowsy afternoon, you realize something? Cold is no longer just about survival. It's about expression, elegance, even spiritual identity. Persia didn't just invent clever ways to freeze water in the desert. It built a culture around it, one that still echoes through stories, songs, and rituals. A culture that took something fleeting and made it eternal. Even now, centuries later, people in modern Iran still sip ice-cold sharbat in shaded courtyards. They still tell tales of sacred snows, paint poems in pomegranate ice ink, and celebrate the cold as a gift, not a challenge. The caravanserai shutters begin to close. The wind catchers keep turning. And as you step back into the sun-drenched street, a soft breeze whispers behind you. Cold endures. In memory, in melody, in ice. You find the last yakshal by accident. It's tucked behind a crumbling aqueduct, half swallowed by wild fig trees. And almost invisible except for the faint glint of lime plaster still clinging to its dome. It looks smaller than the others, humble even. But something about it pulls you in. You step through a gap in the wall, brushing past nettle and thorn, and realize you're standing on what was once a platform for ice rituals. There are grooves in the stone for drainage, and half-faded etchings along the base of the structure, symbols of cooling herbs. Stylized snowflakes, a lone figure holding what might be a spoon or a flame. Inside, it's silent. Not the emptiness kind, the kind that presses against your chest and makes your ears feel full, like the air is listening to. You descend carefully into the dome's heart. It's cooler down here. The walls slope inward, smooth and soft under your fingertips. There's no ice now, but a faint salt scent lingers, mixed with dust and the memory of long-forgotten apricots. You run your hand along the interior and find something unexpected. A sealed niche, small, bricked-up cavity about the size of a bowl. Your fingers tingle. This is where things get speculative. Archaeologists debate whether yakshals like this were purely practical, or whether some also had symbolic roles. Were they temples to winter? Shrines to invisible deities of frost and stillness? Was this niche a storage cubby or an altar? No one agrees. You sit down on a wide, flat stone and close your eyes. You can almost hear the voices, real or imagined, echoing through time. Engineers, chefs, poets, ice haulers, children laughing in cooling gardens. And beneath it all, the quiet hum of questions still unsolved. Because here's the thing, for every well-documented system, the salt insulation, the night water harvesting, the brine-filled churns, there's a matching mystery. Like the ice tower inscriptions found in some ruins, written in ciphers, no one's fully cracked. Some think they're inventory codes, others ritual instructions. There's even a theory that one yakshal near Yazd was used to map constellations. Its vents aligned to specific star clusters, visible only in winter. One fringe historian suggests it wasn't just about storing ice, it was about capturing the night. You tilt your head. It sounds ridiculous, but the longer you sit in this cool, dim chamber, the more it makes a certain, dreamy sense. You rise and step outside. The sun has lowered just enough to stretch shadows long across the old aqueduct. The air is warm again, but your skin still carries that underground chill. Nearby, a shepherd rests beneath an olive tree, fanning himself with a broken reed. You sit beside him, and he offers you something strange, a bitter, chalky candy the size of a coin. What is it, you ask? He grins. Snow medicine, he explains. Back in the old days, when summers were dry and tempers ran hot, people ground mineral snow salts from melted mountain ice and mixed them with herbs, clay, and ash. The result, a tablet you could suck to cool the blood. Whether it worked or not is anyone's guess. You try it. It tastes like if you licked a glacier and then chewed on a pine cone. Not unpleasant. You ask if he ever remembers real snow coming to this village. He nods slowly. One time, I was very young. It lasted an hour. The elders didn't walk on it. They waited until it melted, then collected it in bowls. Said it was from the roof of the sky. You sit in that thought for a while. Snow from the sky's roof. Not a storm, not an inconvenience, but a blessing. A fleeting miracle worth honoring with bowls and silence. You wander back toward the edge of the aqueduct and find another unexpected relic. A broken churn, half buried in soil, still bearing faint traces of turmeric yellow. It might have been used for bastani, or for salep drinks, or maybe even for some forgotten frozen broth meant only for mourners. A nearby stone has a groove worn into it from repeated use. Maybe someone turned the churn here again and again for years. A quiet rhythm, a forgotten ritual. And it hits you. These frozen traditions weren't just about indulgence or survival. They were expressions of time. Every block of ice was a message from yesterday. A season captured, a moment borrowed from the mountains. You couldn't hoard it. You couldn't fake it. You could only use it wisely. Let it melt. And sometimes, letting it melt was the point. Historians still argue whether some Persian rituals involving ice were meant to be intentionally ephemeral, designed to vanish, like sand mandalas or whispered prayers. Evidence exists of ceremonies where cold desserts were made with great care, passed through hands, and then never eaten. Just watched as they softened, shifted, and vanished. Were these spiritual performances, political metaphors, or just an ancient version of performance art? No one knows. But maybe, standing here, by a yakshul, too old to care what year it is, you get it. The cold was never just about temperature. It was about impermanence, about intention, about beauty that didn't ask to last. You step back into the open. The sun has dipped low now, painting the cracked aqueduct gold. The fig leaves rustle softly. A child runs past you, carrying a chipped bowl of water, holding it out like treasure. You smile. Tonight, you'll head back to the city one last time. Visit the people who still carry these stories: ice vendors, sherbet makers, elders who remember the taste of snow brought down from the north. Maybe even try one final dessert. But here, now, at the forgotten edge of this once grand system, you've touched something deeper than frozen syrup or clever engineering. You've touched the soul of cold, and it's quieter than you imagined. The city greets you with a breeze that smells like dates and dry stone. You step back through the narrow alleyways of sun-baked adobe, winding toward the center. The domes are golden now, kissed by the slant of a late afternoon sun. Every rooftop seems to glow, and from somewhere behind a latticework balcony, a child laughs. The sound rings like a bell dipped in syrup. You're back, but not quite where you started, because today isn't about temples or kitchens or silent vaults of snow. Today is about the people who never had access to yakshuls, who never saw the royal churns or the sacred ice basins yet still found ways to make the heat bearable. Beautiful, even celebratory. You pass through a bustling bazaar, veiled in linen shades and threaded with the cool drip of water pipes overhead. Here, ice is more improvised, more adapted, and, honestly, more fun. You spot it immediately. A squat metal cart with a wooden handle and a child-sized brass wheel. The vendor standing behind it is rotating a long rod inside a cylinder packed with salted snow. A crowd of kids waits impatiently, each clutching a rough piece of bark or a stick of sugarcane. You already know what this is. The street sherbet churner. He doesn't use cream or saffron. His secret is simple sour cherry juice, sugar, salt, and thyme. The mixture is slowly frozen against the sides of the cylinder, scraped down, folded, and served onto whatever you've got. You hold out your hand. He drops a shaved mound into your palm, and you slurp it down before it even has time to melt. It's tangy, cold, alive, and entirely perfect. He winks. No king ever had it better, and you believe him. Because while the royal kitchens had bastani so elastic it defied gravity, this street-side Iceman has something else: freedom. He changes his recipe by the day, the mood, the weather. No ceremony, no silver bowls. Just the gift of cold on a hot afternoon in a city that still believes in joy. Nearby, another vendor sells what she calls gaite yaklatol, cubes of snow pressed with watermelon rind and black lime powder. wrapped in leaves like candy. She hands you one, no charge. "You look like you've traveled far," she says. You nod. She nods back. That's the whole exchange. And then there's the puppet show. You weren't expecting it, but a makeshift stage is set up at the edge of the bazaar, and a crowd has gathered to watch a performance titled "The Brave Snowflake and the Sun King." It's ridiculous and wonderful. The puppets are made of cloth and carved fig branches, painted with bright colors and mounted on sticks. The story: tiny snowflake gets lost and lands in the desert, where the Sun King tries to melt it with song and dance. But the snowflake teaches the people how to make sharbat, and in the end, the Sun King sips it and cools down, and everyone becomes friends. The kids scream in laughter. The puppeteer winks at the adults. You realize in that moment that ice, like any good story, belongs to everyone. Not just the powerful, not just the priests or the engineers, but the fruit vendor, the carpenter's daughter, the baker with too many cats. Cold has become folklore, a shared language whispered across generations with a grin and a raised bowl. Historians still argue how far ice democratization really went. Was access to yak-cooled goods ever truly widespread? Were these markets fed from urban ice pits, or were they clever fakes using salt brine and mountain herbs? No consensus. But maybe the truth doesn't live in ledgers or ledge inscriptions. Maybe it lives in a puppet with a felt snowflake glued to its nose. You keep walking, and the stories keep coming. At a public bathhouse, you meet an elderly woman applying a cooling clay mask made from powdered marble, yarrow, and water collected from a nearby qanat that had passed through a shaded tunnel. She insists it's the secret to her skin, and you don't argue. The bathhouse itself is a marvel of thermal management: hot rooms, cold plunge pools, steam vents redirected through underground pipes cooled by residual ice from morning deliveries. She leans over and whispers, "The water sings different when it's cold." Later, you visit a young man who runs a poetry cafe. On the wall are verses dedicated not to love or war, but to frozen things. "Oh, mango dream that dances on my lip. You were born in a dome, but you died on my tongue." You order his signature blend, sour cherry and smoked rose ice, layered in a glass between crushed almonds and ginger syrup. He calls it Ash Katir, or Tears of July. You ask why. He just says, because it never lasts. Everywhere you go, there's this mix of play and reverence. A child splashing snowmelt on his sandals because it makes the ground polite. A bride wearing a silver chain with a tiny yakshul charm. A street artist painting swirls of cold blue onto the walls of a spice shop, claiming it helps the turmeric behave. You sit on a bench, your stomach full of chill and your head full of laughter. And it occurs to you, this culture didn't just receive cold, it reshaped it, named it, danced with it, turned it from survival into something almost spiritual. Then brought it back down to earth with a scoop of sour cherry and a stick of bark. And still, the questions whisper. Was this all planned, engineered? Or was it just the slow bloom of cleverness over generations? Historians will keep arguing. But you've tasted the answer. You've stood in the desert and been offered snow. You've watched syrup freeze on a spinning plate in the middle of a market. You've seen what happens when you hand a child a scoop of ice in a city where the air sings with heat. You get up as the sky begins to purple. The calls to prayer are starting. Lamps flicker on and laughter softens to murmurs. You pass one last vendor on your way out of the bazaar. He's packing up, covering his salted cylinder with cloth. You ask what happens to the leftovers. He grins. Tomorrow's miracle. You wake before dawn to the sound of sweeping. Not a grand awakening, just the gentle scrape of a broom over tiles somewhere beyond the courtyard. The kind of sound that belongs to cities before they stretch their limbs. The air is still. Not cold, but not yet warm either. This is the edge of morning, when memories hide in corners and the ghosts of coolness linger on the stone. You dress quietly and step outside. today, you're not following ice or taste or structure. Today is about what's left behind, in words, in gestures, in the minds of people who've never once stored a block of snow, but who somehow still carry its presence like a secret prayer. This is about modern echoes. You start your morning with a school visit. Children in white uniforms, some barefoot, some not, stream into a small, sun-splashed courtyard where the walls are painted with animals, rivers, and curiously a dome-shaped structure with blue lines coming out of it. A yak shell. Inside, the teacher is Mid-Lisan, talking about the ancient cool keepers of Persia. It's more story time than history class, and the children are rapt. She describes how ice was once pulled from the mountains and tucked into cone-shaped shelters. How entire cities revolved around the miracle of not melting. Then she pauses and says, "What do you think cold feels like to someone who's never felt it?" A hand goes up. Like the first bite of cucumber. Another, like touching your grandmother's necklace. Another, like quiet wind. You're not crying, but the corners of your eyes betray you just a little. Later, during recess, you talk to a boy sitting alone, drawing on a tile with chalk. You ask what he's sketching. "A Charbot machine," he says. "It runs on singing." You ask if it works. He shrugs. "It does in my head." You sit beside him and ask if he's ever seen snow. "No," he says, "but I heard it melts like time." Where did he hear that? Cartoons? And my uncle. You carry that sentence with you the rest of the morning. At a nearby museum, you find a wing dedicated to desert innovations. Water clocks, Kanat models, wind catcher diagrams. And there, under soft yellow light, a full-scale cross-section of a yakchal. Its interior exposed like a beehive sliced open. Children press their faces to the glass. One whispers, "It's like a spaceship, but for cold." Next to it is a digital screen playing interviews with older villagers. One man says, "My grandfather used to say, 'Respect the snow. It remembers things you forget.'" A woman laughs and adds, "We didn't just eat ice cream. We saved it for births, for deaths, for weddings." One scoop could make an entire room quiet. The footage cuts to black. Just a sentence. Not everything melts when it disappears. You leave the museum and walk down a narrow street where artists have painted yakshals onto the walls not as scientific diagrams, but as dreamscapes. Some float in the sky. Others glow like lanterns underwater. One has a long set of wings, mid-flight over a city made of water channels and plum trees. You ask one of the artists why she paints them. She shrugs, "Because they're beautiful, and because people forget." Later at a bookstore, you find a children's novel titled The Girl Who Chased Winter. It's about a child in the desert who digs her own yakshal to trap the wind so she can save a snowflake that never melts. There's no ice in the book, just the idea of cold. The idea that something fleeting can be worth everything. You sit in the shop's corner and read the whole thing. By the end, you're not sure if you're cold or just still. In the afternoon, you join a university seminar on climate resilience. The lecturer is young, fast-talking, all fire and gestures. But she pauses during a slide about passive cooling systems and says, "Sometimes the past isn't just wise, it's smarter than us." She clicks to a diagram of a yakshal, then to a wind catcher, then to a photo of villagers building a modern ice pit using ancient methods. No electricity. No fans, just lime, ash, geometry, and patience. She says, in a world getting hotter, the future may depend on remembering how to be cold without killing the planet. You want to clap, but this isn't that kind of crowd. Still, you file that thought away. Cold as memory. Cold as adaptation. As evening approaches, you take a ride out to the outskirts, where a small community garden has transformed its water tank into a makeshift yakchal. Not for ice, not for drama, just to keep drinking water cool enough for elderly gardeners during summer. One woman wrinkled, glowing, unstoppable hands. You, a glass. "Taste this," she says. "Tell me if it's ordinary." You sip. It's water, and it's extraordinary. Not because of the flavor, but because of the care. She smiles. We don't freeze it, we remember it. The night settles over the desert city. Lamps flicker on. Fans hum. Someone across the alley starts a slow song on a ney flute-long, breathy notes that sound like wind in a narrow dome. You sit on a rooftop and look out over the skyline. From up here, the old yakshals still rise like soft gray ghosts among the new towers. Some are cracked, some abandoned. But some amazingly have been reborn, converted into tea houses, museums, libraries, meditation spaces. One was turned into a public cooling center, a place where people without a sea come in the hottest months to rest, read, even nap. The locals call it the Silent House. You think of the child's voice from earlier. It melts like time. You think of the chalk drawing, the poem cafe, the grandmother's water. You think of all the ways cold has stayed alive, even when its structure has faded. And for a moment, you understand. Cold isn't a temperature. It's a culture. It's art. It's memory. It's a kindness passed down in cubes, in domes, in softly whispered songs. It's the echo of snow where snow never lingers. And it lives still in stories, just like this one. The sky turns dark with purpose now. Not the rushed twilight of people hurrying home, but the kind that stretches itself slowly across the city, pulling shadows from under the tiles and placing stars, one by one, like an old tailor pinning pearls to velvet. You find yourself back at the poolside garden, not because it's required or dramatic or expected, just because there's nothing left to chase. You've seen the yakshals, the syrup, the puppets, the melted poetry. You've carried the snow on your hands, on your tongue, in your thoughts. And now, it's time to just sit with it. A low wall surrounds the water, and behind it, the trees sway gently under a night breeze. Their leaves clatter softly, almost like distant applause. Someone has hung small lanterns in the branches. Their glow skips across the ripples like lazy fireflies. The pool itself, still, perfectly still. A grandmother and her granddaughter sit nearby. The older woman is telling a story, her voice no louder than a yawn. You catch only parts. ... And so the block of ice never melted because it was placed inside a prayer. Double quotes ... And the queen said, "Let the dessert be cold enough to forgive." ... They say if you stand very still, the wind will carry your taste buds back to childhood. You lean back and close your eyes. The air smells like sweet basil and stone. The whispers of cold are quieter now. Less a conversation, more a hum beneath your ribs. A resonance. Because you've passed the mechanics, the politics, the history, even the superstition. Now, all that's left is the echo. You hear footsteps behind you. A boy arrives with a small dish and sets it beside you without a word. He walks off before you can thank him. Inside the dish is a final treat, a translucent, icy jelly, faintly tinted pink, garnished with crushed violet petals and a single shard of what might be candied rose stem. It doesn't have a name. Or maybe it does, but you don't ask. You taste it. The cold is soft, not sharp, not biting. It doesn't demand attention, it waits. It doesn't shout flavor, it suggests. The sweetness is modest, the chill delicate. It's the kind of dessert made not to delight the mouth, but to quiet the noise in your head. You take another bite, and then another. You finish it slowly, carefully, as if to stretch the final chord of a song you never want to end. A man sits beside you. Older, maybe, maybe not. He says nothing at first, just watches the ripples. Then he says, simply, "They used to say a good cold drink could carry a prayer farther than a fast horse." You nod. You believe that now. The night deepens. The lanterns flicker. A gentle hush settles over the courtyard. And you realize, for all its science, ice was never truly about preservation. Not really. It wasn't about control. or even flavor. It was about the gesture. The belief that something brief, beautiful, and impossible could still be made real land offered to others. You sit in that silence, longer than you expect, because some things deserve not to be rushed. Because cold, like sleep, like peace, isn't a destination, it's an invitation. Wind down, let it all fade now. The stories, the syrup, the wind towers spinning slowly above domes of lime and shadow. Let the distant echoes of laughter in the garden drift into memory, soft and golden at the edges. Your body sinks a little deeper, into the stone bench, into the hush, into the comfort of having learned without trying too hard. You've wandered through sun and snow, through sweet and sacred. And now you're just still, quiet, cool in the places that matter. The wind has settled to a hush, not a chill, just a suggestion, like the breath of someone you trust beside you, asleep. Like the final ripple in a pool after a bird has flown away. You can still taste it, can't you? That last bite? It lingers in your thoughts like a kind sentence whispered before goodbye. Somewhere, far off, a donkey sighs. A flute plays. Or maybe that's just your breath, slow and steady. Maybe the city is asleep now too, wrapped in the same quiet you carry. And the cold, it's not gone. It's just beneath everything, soft as silk. Present as a pulse, patient. Let it stay with you. Let it cool the places in your mind that still burn too fast. Let it drift you toward sleep like snow falling upward. You don't have to remember everything, just feel it. The softness, the story, the snow in the desert, and the peace of knowing it was real. Even if it melts, even if it vanishes, it was real. Good night.